Welcome to Psycho Rift. Please consider subscribing. It's free. Thank you. Story 1. Discovered the truth through a misplaced receipt. I'm 33, and my wife is 30. We've been married for 5 years, and up until recently, I thought we were on solid ground. Sure, life had become routine. Work, dinner, weekend spent watching Netflix. The usual, but I figured that's just how it is after a few years together. The thrill and excitement mellow out, and you settle into a comfortable rhythm. I never thought that rhythm was a sign of something broken beneath the surface. I never would have guessed how wrong I was until last month. It started innocently enough. I was cleaning up the house, straightening things up like I do every weekend, when I found a receipt in the pocket of my wife's jacket. At first, I didn't think much of it. She's always leaving little bits of paper, receipts, and notes in her pockets. But what caught my eye this time was the name of the place on the receipt. It was from a luxury hotel, a place we had never been. It was strange, to say the least. We're not the kind of couple who splurges on fancy getaways, especially not out of the blue. Then I noticed the date on the receipt. It was from just a week before. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she had gone there for some work event, or perhaps a girl's night out that I'd forgotten about. But as much as I tried to push the uneasy feeling aside, it kept gnawing at me. Something wasn't adding up. Later that night, as we sat down for dinner, I casually asked her about her week. She gave me the usual rundown: work, errands, time spent with her sister. But there was no mention of the hotel. That's when my stomach dropped. I knew something wasn't right. The next day, while she was at work, I couldn't stop thinking about it. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. I felt like I was going crazy, but I needed to know the truth. So, I did something I've never done before. I went to the hotel's website. I typed in the name on the receipt and checked the booking details. My heart pounded as the information loaded on the screen. There was in black and white her name, the date, and the fact that the reservation was for 2 people. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My wife, the person I trusted most in the world, had lied to me. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was undeniable. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, trying to figure out how to confront her, trying to prepare myself for whatever excuse or explanation she would offer. That night, I waited until after dinner to bring it up. I showed her the receipt and asked her straight out if there was something she needed to tell me. At first, she tried to deny it. She looked me in the eye and said I was overreacting, that I was imagining things. But when I showed her the reservation details, she broke down in tears. She admitted that she had been seeing someone else, a man from her office. She swore it wasn't serious, that it was just a fling, a mistake, something that didn't mean anything. But how could it not mean anything? How do you fling away 5 years of marriage? I felt shattered, like everything we had built together was suddenly a lie. Now, I'm left trying to figure out what to do next. She's been begging me for forgiveness, telling me it was a moment of weakness, that she's willing to do anything to make it right. But I don't know if I can ever trust her again. Every time I look at her, all I see is betrayal. How do you rebuild something that's been broken so completely? Part of me wants to try to hold on to what we had, but another part of me wonders if it's time to walk away and never look back. Story 2. A late-night text revealed it all. I'm 35, and my wife is 31. We've been married for 7 years, and we've always prided ourselves on having a strong, open relationship. We talk about everything: our jobs, our dreams, our fears. We've never been the kind of couple that hides things from each other. Or at least, that's what I thought. I was so sure of our connection that I never doubted her, never even considered the possibility that something could be going on behind my back. Until that night, a couple of months ago, when everything changed. It was late, around midnight, and we had just gone to bed. She was in the shower, and I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone when her phone, which was on the nightstand, lit up with a message. Normally, I wouldn't have looked. We trusted each other, and I had never felt the need to check her messages before. But something about this time was different. I don't know if it was intuition or just curiosity, but I glanced over and saw the message preview. It was from a guy I'd never heard of before, and it read, "I can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible." My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I had just read. Was it a joke? A misunderstanding? For a few seconds, I sat there, frozen, hoping it was all some kind of mistake. But the longer I stared at the message, the more it became clear that it wasn't. I felt like my entire world was crumbling around me. My heart pounded, and my mind raced with questions. Who was this guy? What had she been doing last night? Why hadn't I noticed anything before? When she came out of the shower, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I confronted her, asking her straight out who the message was from. At first, she tried to laugh it off, saying it was just a joke between friends, that I was overreacting. But I could see the panic in her eyes, and when I pressed her, the truth came tumbling out. She had been seeing someone else. For the past few months, while I was at home, thinking everything was fine, she had been sneaking around behind my back meeting this guy after work. She told me it wasn't serious, that it had started as just a friendship but had escalated. But how could something like this not be serious? She had been lying to me for months, deceiving me every day while I trusted her blindly. I felt betrayed in a way I never thought possible. The woman I had built my life with had been living a double life, and I hadn't seen it coming at all. Now, I'm stuck in this unbearable limbo, unsure of what to do next. Part of me wants to walk away and never look back, to escape the pain and start over. But another part of me can't bear the thought of losing everything we've built together. 7 years of memories, of love, of shared dreams. It all feels like it's slipping through my fingers. But how do you move forward when the trust is gone? How do you rebuild when the foundation has been shattered? Can a marriage survive something like this? Story 3. Cheating during our break. I'm 29 and my wife is 27. A few months ago, after a lot of arguing and tension, we made the mutual decision to take a break from our relationship. We both agreed that we wouldn't see other people during this time, that this break was meant to give us space to reflect on our relationship and figure out if we could work through our problems. I thought we were on the same page. I thought this break was about healing and growth. At least, that's what I thought we had agreed to. During the break, I focused on myself. I spent time reflecting on our relationship, trying to understand where things had gone wrong. I was hopeful that this time apart would help us come back stronger, that we could fix what was broken and move forward. But one night while I was out with some friends, I ran into a mutual friend who casually mentioned seeing my wife out at a bar with another guy. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I told myself there had to be some mistake. We had agreed not to see other people. I trusted her, but when I asked her about it, she didn't deny it. She admitted that she had been seeing someone else during our break. She tried to justify it by saying that we were on a break, and technically, we weren't together. But to me, it felt like a betrayal. We had made a promise to each other, and she broke that promise. I felt like everything we were trying to fix had just fallen apart even more. I had been working so hard to save our relationship, to make things better, while she had been out with someone else. How do you come back from that? How do you trust someone again after they betrayed you like that, even if you were technically on a break? Now, I'm torn between fighting for our relationship or walking away. She says it didn't mean anything, that she was confused and made a mistake. But how can I believe her? How can I trust her again? Story 4. The work trip that wasn't. I'm 40 and my wife is 37. She works in a corporate role that requires frequent travel, and I've always trusted her completely. Our relationship was built on a strong foundation of mutual respect, and we both valued the independence our careers provided. Over the years, I had grown used to her business trips, and I never once doubted her honesty. She would pack her bags, kiss me goodbye, and leave for a few days, then return as if nothing had changed. But last month, something about one of these trips didn't sit right with me. She told me she was heading to Chicago for a work conference, a typical business trip in her line of work. She left in the usual manner, smiling and reassuring me that she'd be back in just a few days. I didn't think anything of it at first because this was just part of our routine. I spent the first night alone, catching up on some work and watching TV. The next day, I decided to check her social media. This is where things began to feel off. She had posted a few photos, but the locations didn't match up with where she said she was. The posts seemed generic, and her captions were vague, something she didn't usually do. Typically, she would post about her work meetings, the conference venue, or pictures with colleagues. But this time, there were only scenic shots of city streets and a restaurant that didn't look like anything from Chicago. At first, I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe she was just being more private this time. Or maybe she was exploring the city in her downtime. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. When I called her that evening, her tone seemed distant. She was less engaged in our conversation, and I noticed long pauses when I asked about her day. I chalked it up to her being tired from a long workday, but something deep inside gnawed at me. I tried to shake off the feelings of suspicion, but over the next few days, those feelings only grew stronger. By the time she returned, I couldn't ignore them any longer. She came back, kissed me hello, and acted as if everything was normal. But I couldn't shake the nagging doubts. She seemed more distant than usual, and there was an unfamiliar tension in the air. That night, after she fell asleep, I did something I never thought I would do. I checked her email. I hated myself for it, but I needed answers. What I found there shattered my world. In her inbox were hotel confirmations and flight tickets for a trip to a completely different city. She hadn't gone to Chicago at all. The email showed she had traveled to Denver, a city where we had no family, no friends, and no professional ties that I knew of. My heart pounded as I stared at the confirmation for a luxury hotel room booked for 2 people. I scrolled through her emails, hoping against hope that there was some explanation, some reason for this trip that didn't involve the betrayal I feared. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. She hadn't been on a work trip. She had gone to see someone else. The next morning, I confronted her. My hands were shaking as I held up my phone, showing her the emails I had found. For a moment, she just stared at me, her face drained of color. I could see the gears turning in her head as she tried to come up with a lie, an excuse that would somehow explain everything. But in the end, she didn't even try. She simply admitted it. She told me she had been seeing this other person for a few months. They had met during one of her previous trips, and things had escalated from there. She insisted that it wasn't serious, that it was just an escape, something that didn't mean anything in the grand scheme of our marriage. But how could something like this not be serious? How could she fly to another city to be with someone else and expect me to believe it didn't matter? I asked her how long this had been going on, and her answer only deepened the wound. She told me it had started earlier that year, during one of her business trips. They would meet whenever she traveled, and she had lied to me time and time again, assuring me that everything was fine, that these trips were purely for work. Each time I had kissed her goodbye, believing she was going to a conference or a meeting, she had been lying to my face. She claimed it had never been about love, that she didn't have any emotional attachment to this other person. It was, according to her, a way to escape the pressures of our life together, the stress of work, and the monotony of marriage. But how could she not see the gravity of what she had done? How could she think that an affair, no matter how casual she claimed it to be, wouldn't destroy the trust that had taken years to build? Now, I'm not trying to figure out if there's any way to move forward. She says she's willing to do whatever it takes to fix things, but I don't even know where to begin. How do you rebuild a marriage when the foundation of trust has been shattered? Every time I look at her, I'm reminded of the lies, of the trips she took that weren't what they seemed, of the nights I spent alone while she was with someone else. Can a marriage survive something like this? Or is it time to face the fact that what we had is already gone?